Well, boys, it is finally time. Today, we're going to talk about Loki. I'm doing this completely unscripted, just off the cuff, because I kind of got my inspiration flowing from this thing I read, and I'd like to try and ride that if I can. I'd preface this by saying I'm not a neo-pagan. I'm not Northern tradition. And I sure as hell ain't no fucking rocket trip. I'm a Reconstructionist heathen. The specific path that I follow is Pharisee, which is Anglo-Saxon for the old ways. And I'm a Woden'sman, which for those of you who don't know how to English is the exact same thing as an Odinsman. But for all intents and purposes, it's Asatru, just with cooler names. Anyway, my beautiful, wonderful fiance let me borrow issue 24 of Witches and Pagans magazine. And in it has an article by a misguided, well-meaning idiot who calls himself Raven Caldera. And before I get into talking about Loki, just for catharsis, I'd like to address a couple of things in this very idiotic article. Well, I mean, he basically says that that any man who calls himself a heathen is a racist and a homophobe. Which is, of course, ridiculous. And he completely does not understand why heathens try to differentiate themselves from the term neo-pagan. Because we're not neo-pagans. We don't like to be called neo-pagans because our spirituality is attested to in works of scholarship over 1,000 years old. Earliest I know of being Tacitus's Germania, which was written in 9 AD. Whereas most people who call themselves neo-pagan, their spirituality was invented in the 1930s. My favorite part: in many heathen circles today, the word Wiccan is a term of derision. Of course, the word Wiccan is a term of derision because, like I said, our spirituality is both scholarly and ancient, whereas theirs didn't exist until the 1930s. Also, the word heathen actually has an etymology, whereas Wicca is just a corruption of an Anglo-Saxon word, and coined by Gerald Gardner back in the 1930s. But the most infuriating thing about this article, the thing that bothers me about it the most, is that a broken clock is right twice a day. Hidden carefully in this barely readable mire of self-loathing liberal idiocy, you will find a couple of kernels of truth. He is right when he says that the heathen community contains far too much. Contains far too much monotheistic polarism. Rather than looking at the lore and looking at the practices of our ancestors from a detached standpoint and making our judgments based on that, we have allowed Christian dogma to infect our faith. This, in my opinion, is the reason why there is so much prejudice against Loki's men. My personal belief is that in our cosmology, there is no good and there is no evil. Good and evil are monotheistic concepts which come from Zoroaster. And you really can't get any less heathen than Zoroaster. There is no good, there is no evil. There is order, and there is chaos. And it is bad to have too much of either one. Loki is the supreme archetype of chaos, much as Tyr is the supreme archetype of order. And it is true that many Loki's men are very chaotic people. Most of the Tyr's men I know are cops, and I fucking hate cops. Now, of course, most of the prejudice against Loki comes from the story of Ragnarok. And to this I say, come on. Do you really believe that Ragnarok is going to happen? Do you really honestly believe that someday the gods are going to come back and there's going to be a big battle that destroys the world? And then, let me tell you about the fucking Voluspa. The Voluspa is the most overtly Christianized piece of lore that we have. Unless you count fucking Wulfstan's homily. Unless you count Wulfstan's homily, you really can't get more Christian than the Voluspa. I mean, just look at the end. Look at the end of the poem. The battle is over. The world has been destroyed and renewed. And then Jesus shows up. It doesn't say this explicitly, but neither does it name any specific one of the gods. It just says, the glorious one. My opinion is that the story of Ragnarok was made up by Christians to put the old gods to bed. It's a cool story, bro, but that's all it really is. If you honestly believe that Ragnarok is coming, you're an idiot, and you should go join the SCA. Instead of calling yourself a heathen. If you really believe that Ragnarok is coming, go join the Vikings of the SCA and go back to church. And also, in Snorri's Edda, it says that Balder was killed with a mistletoe. Have you ever seen a mistletoe? MacGyver could not stab a man with a mistletoe. However, in the Danish history of Saxo Grammaticus, it says that Balder was killed with a sword. The mistletoe was a common name for swords. Just because it comes from Snorri, and just because it's Icelandic, that does not make it a perfect source. Now, given that we have deconstructed the myth of Ragnarok for what it is, a silly and ridiculous lie that does make a very cool story, I no longer see any reason why prejudice against Loki should exist. If Loki is not responsible for the fall of the gods, why should we hate him? I think that prejudice against Loki is just more is the result of monotheistic brainwashing. Because Reconstructionist heathenry is still a fairly young faith in this day and age. The vast majority of us came to heathenry from Christianity. And for some of us, the way that we see the world is still colored by Christian concepts. So we feel some sort of deep-seated psychological need to have the great enemy. And they don't pick Thrym, they don't pick Surt, they pick Loki, because they see a lot more of him. However, if you actually sit down and you intelligently and detachedly read the lore, Loki does not come off as too bad of a guy. Yes, he is a bastard. Yes, he is a liar. So is Odin. But all of the gods have their good sides and their bad sides. Loki is a liar, a trickster, and a scoundrel. Thor is unnecessarily violent. Odin is an oath-breaker, a murderer, and a dirty old man. Tyr is a Nazi. All of the gods have their dark side. They also have their good side. Tyr is an oath keeper, the lord of law and order, and giver of strength. Thor is the protector. Odin is the lord of wisdom, sovereignty, and inspiration. And Loki, well, in my opinion, Loki is the god of cleaning up after yourself. Look at the Skaldskaparmál, the story of Thjazi and Skadi. Who was it that volunteered to make Skadi laugh so that the gods would not have to suffer her wrath? Loki. Look at the Thrymskvida. Who was it that figured out the best way to get Thor's hammer back? Loki. And look at the story of the building of the walls of Asgard. Who was it distracted the giant's horse so that the gods could win their bet? Loki. I believe I've made my points. So in conclusion, I would just like to say, please, stop thinking like a fucking Christian.